Greetings from 99 Bishopsgate, where we are presenting in conjunction with the Crafts Council a wonderful retrospective exhibition, Matt Smith 2020, with Matt Smith here. So I'm Cynthia Corbett, and I'm the director of the Cynthia Corbett Gallery and the founder and director of the Young Masters Archives. And we're going to begin our little Instagram tonight in front of this incredible piece that was produced by Matt Smith specifically for a project he worked on with the National Trust. And then, fortunately for all of us, he submitted this amazing work for the Young Masters inaugural Melis Grand Ceramic Prize in 2014, and, of course, won. And I would love to hear some words by Matt about this very special piece, and could you tell us a little bit about it?
Sure, thanks Cynthia. The piece was made as part of the Unravel project, which was a 3-year partnership with the National Trust, and this piece was made for the Vine, which is a house near Basingstoke. And the piece talks about Horace Walpole and John Shute. John Shute owned the house, and Horace, with him and another man, were the Committee on Taste.
Committee on Taste?
The Committee on Taste.
I like that.
And Horace Walpole would write letters to John Shute about what he should buy and how he should decorate his house. And I had this feeling that Horace was overstepping the mark, and these were all the objects that he felt should be in the house, but which Horace Walpole thought he should have in the house, but John Shute maybe didn't want. So the piece got placed together and then placed behind the staircase in the house, just out of the way, to keep the friendship going, but to allow John to keep the house as he wanted it.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Wow.
And the form of it obviously echoes a wedding cake, and the two men had a very intimate relationship, and I think this talks more about their intimacy than maybe has been mentioned in the past.
Wow, that's amazing. And then we were so fortunate in 2014 to actually be able to present this to the wider world at Young Masters. And I think there might be a few other pieces from that time that is here at the feast. Can we maybe have a little walk around here, and would you be able to tell us a little bit about this?
Sure.
And also the vitrine, if you don't mind.
Well, the vitrines, I've got to say, are beautiful. They were in the V&A galleries before the ceramics galleries got redeveloped, and when the galleries were being redeveloped, the vitrines were sold off, and various galleries around the country have acquired them, and these came from another gallery, Gallery SO, in Brick Lane, who have lent them for the exhibition. And there's something really nice about vitrines that were made for showing ceramics, being used for ceramics again here. But a number of these pieces were made for Pallant House in Chichester for an exhibition called A Place at the Table, which tried to unpick how fine art and craft and the applied arts, the industrial arts and the studio ceramics all kind of dance around each other, and nobody's quite clear where the barriers are. So they're trying to play with some of those binaries.
And it was called, the exhibition was called?
A Place at the Table.
Would you mind, Matt, because I have had so many questions from collectors and interested art people, would you mind maybe explaining a little bit how you actually can do these? Because I see that there's silver sometimes within the artwork and sometimes holding it.
Yeah, sure. So the ceramic pieces are made by taking molds from found objects and casting into them, and then the ceramics are joined together while they're still wet and then fired. But the silverware is found silverware, but when you make ceramics and fire it, it shrinks down, so there's a lot of measuring to make things bigger than they need to be, because you know they're going to reduce in size when they fire. The silverware, again, a lot of it is measuring and a little bit of guesswork to see if the silverware will fit with the ceramics once it's fired. But also there's lusters are used on the head of that piece, which is an unglazed colour that.
This one. This
yeah.
piece here.
So it's a platinum luster which you paint on and then fire in the ceramics, and the precious metal stays on the ceramic after it's been fired.
And can you talk a little bit about, is it called Blue Boy?
Yeah, sure.
I love Blue Boy.
Blue Boy's a bit rude, it's got to be said, Cynthia.
Oh, well, that's probably why I like it.
So he's based on Gainsborough's Blue Boy, which was also the name of a gay porn magazine.
Oh.
And he's using a silver sugar shaker, and it's that idea of sweetness and tasty treats.
And then the Black Bunny?
The Black Bunny, sometimes you just make because you like the form, and this one was made out of pure pleasure. It's got a really interesting glaze on it that's very pigment heavy, which gives it almost like a flocked type look. And I've got to say, it's a piece I haven't seen for 5 years, and I'm really falling back in love with it, seeing it here. That it's hard to make out what's going on, and it sucks in the light. And it's one of the pieces in the show that I think really makes you work hard to understand what's going on.
Because it has that real, it has a flat texture, almost like if you could touch it, it would come away.
It's very, very matte, almost
Yes.
a little bit like somewhere between sandpaper and velvet.
And was that deliberate, or was, okay?
Yeah.
So you're just really clever to be able to do that.
Absolutely.
Well, I love the bunny. I love the bunny. Now maybe we'll move over here, and if I could, can I just say a couple things? This exhibition, Matt Smith 2020, is very unique because it's bringing together many different series that you've worked on for public commissions like the National Trust, museum shows like at the Fitzwilliam, your work you did at the V&A, and then recent work, which we'll talk about later, that you did for Collect. But I think there's quite a bit of the pieces in this vitrine from the Fitzwilliam Parian Unpacked.
Yeah.
Is that?
That's absolutely, yeah.
And maybe
right.
could you tell us a little about that show and the genesis of that show and some of the pieces, particularly, if you wouldn't mind talking about the double-headed girl and egg here?
Yeah, God, I was really lucky. I had a residency at the V&A in 2015 and 16, and I was working a lot with Parian, which is porcelain with a flux added into it that makes it quite shiny and look like marble. And out of that, the Fitzwilliam came to talk to me, and they'd acquired a large collection of Parian busts from the 1870s, 1880s. And they asked
White Parian.
White
yes.
Parian.
Mm-hmm.
And they asked if I'd be interested in maybe working with that, and which is an absolute treat. And I was interested in flux, that material that makes the porcelain look like marble, and the idea of flux as change, and what might have happened in the 150 years or so since these pieces were made to how we now view these people now. And what we ended up doing was, within the octagonal room, making 6 chintz wallpapers, each related to a genocide of the British Empire, and pulling people out of the collection of Parian and placing people responsible for those atrocities on the walls in front of the images of the actions they took. And it wasn't a show that was trying to work out if these people were good or bad. It was just more looking at these historical figures that we elevated. There was the darker side to some of them, and trying to put that in balance. It was also a time of the Brexit debate, and the idea of people, or in this case, objects moving into the collection, competing for resources, and discussions about who was allowed in and who wasn't, that I found particularly upsetting. And I think the show acted as a metaphor for that.
And would you be able to maybe just expand on some of that related to, I'm particularly interested to hear your thoughts on the significance of the two-headed girl?
Sure. She was placed within the fine art galleries at the Fitzwilliam, and she's actually, her eyes have been erased on both sides. And I was interested in that idea of what we see and what we choose not to see within museum collections. And also who we see within museum collections represented and who maybe isn't shown so much. And we're talking about class, sexuality, gender, who the museum privileges and who maybe doesn't get seen so much. There are two pieces in the case, if you don't mind.
Oh, please.
The horse and the Cupid. And they were both made in response to the bronze collections at the Fitzwilliam. And I was just really playfully with those, trying to recreate in my own way sculptures that were in the bronze collections, Renaissance bronzes, and just trying to understand the sort of challenges that the makers had in terms of suspending objects and stopping them slumping and moving during the making process. So it felt like a dialogue across 400 years.
And in terms of the technical aspects, Matt, that particularly the horse and the way the horse is presented and the Cupid, how it's leaning.
Yeah.
How were you able to get that?
It's not easy. So Parian, while it's beautiful and it has a shine and the material looks gorgeous, you need to fire it really high to get that shine to come through. And within a few degrees, what turns out as a shine becomes a slump. And you can see with these figures here that what started as upright, during the firing has started to curve over and move. And I think Parian's one of those clays that lives a lot in the kiln. And as much as you might want to prop it and keep it very rigid to the firing, it will move around. And I think there's a joy in letting the clay speak as well as trying to control what it says.
Great. So I'm going to ask Matt to walk, and then if you wouldn't mind filming us as we are walking. And we're going to come to the vitrine, which houses what we're going to talk about next, if that's okay. We're going to talk about how we got here to Brookfield's property and properties, and how the genesis of this larger exhibition is, and the significance of the Crafts Council and Collect earlier this year, Collect 2020. So basically, we as a gallery was presenting several pieces by Matt Smith in Collect 2020, and it included for the first time the ceramics mixed with the tapestry work. And what was really fantastic, and it was a fantastic response to the work, including by Brookfields in their inaugural award, and it was called the Brookfields inaugural award with the Crafts Council. And the idea was that an artist, and this Matt, was awarded a prize, an acquisition prize, as well as an exhibition prize, which is how we come to be here. And I think what would be lovely is if, Matt, if you would talk about maybe some of the pieces that were acquired for the Crafts Council, and maybe if you can have the relationship between the ceramics and the tapestries. So I think people would be really interested in that.
Yeah, can I bring you around here? Behind the step.
Mm-hmm.
So the Crafts Council, there are three pieces in the case that the Crafts Council have acquired. The first one was acquired about a year or so ago, and it's based on the ladies of Llangollen, who were two Anglo-Irish women who left proposed marriages in Ireland and ran off to North Wales to set up a house together. And they became cause célèbres that Wordsworth and Byron would go and visit. And as part of a show at Birmingham Museum in 2010 called Querying the Museum, this piece was made as a celebration of these two women and their love, and placed within the historic ceramics there. And this was my first acquisition by the Crafts Council, and led on to the Brookfield Prize earlier on this year, where the two pieces next to it, the Pearl Girl and the Pearl Seller, were both acquired. A lot of my work is about investigating museum collections and talking about whose histories are heard and whose histories are silenced. And these hooded figures, for want of a better word, talk about that silencing. The Conehead in particular raises questions about Are these Easter figures from Spain? Are they Ku Klux Klan figures? What's going on here? And I think the artist Lynn Chadwick's a big inspiration for me, but also there's just this dynamicism of form. The cone somehow brings your eye up and out of the body. And this idea of silencing carries on with the textiles, if I could show you just behind. The pieces are made from found textiles. The textiles are usually based on famous paintings, historical paintings by men, which are then turned into hobby kits and embroidered and sewn by usually women in the domestic sphere as amateur crafters. These pieces then get bought by me and unpicked and restitched, and so they've done this movement from the fine art world into the craft world and back to fine art, and done a gender reveal of paintings by men of women that are then embroidered by women and then unpicked and restitched by myself. There's what I wanted to do is, with queer and feminist readings of text, there's often a sense of, if you look at the marginal characters, it's where the interesting action is happening. And with these, I wanted to take out the main characters and replace them with the background, so that you have to look at the margins and you have to look at the background, because that's all you're left with. And I think they stop the eye settling. There's no face to rest on. So they become, I hope, they become more dynamic and a bit more bouncy when you're looking at them.
And is there the patterns that you're using when you recreate or restitch?
Yeah.
Is there a significance there, the meaning of that?
They varied. Usually they tend to be quite graphic. I've used some Norwegian knitting patterns. It's kind of quite often I'll go back to historical sewing patterns and take those and bring them in. And there's obviously a huge history of textile embroidery and knitting. All use this gridded pattern that can translate from historic into the contemporary.
And but this is more contemporary. This is a more contemporary. It is contemporary because it's your hand.
Yeah.
But it's also a more contemporary pattern than, and that one up there as well. That looks like very Scottish, or.
It's like, yeah, it's a gridded pattern. I guess in a way I was interested with things like the photography of Edward Muybridge, where he would photograph animals on a gridded background to understand animal locomotion, and that kind of segues really neatly onto the screen prints, if that's okay.
Yeah. Well, can you tell us a little bit
Yeah.
about the genesis of this, because that was from your show, your recent show that is still on at Pitts Rivers Museum, Losing Venus. And I think these silk screens are absolutely gorgeous. The first time I saw them was here last week, and I think if you wouldn't mind standing in front of them and telling us a bit.
Yeah, so as Cynthia said, they're from a show called Losing Venus at the Pitt Rivers Museum in Oxford, which is an ethnographic museum. And when I was invited to work with them, I was interested. They've got a huge collection of Captain Cook objects from his journey to Australia. And digging into this a little bit more, I found out Cook was funded by the Admiralty and the Royal Society to go to Tahiti to map the transit of the planet Venus, the goddess of love. By measuring it there and measuring it in London, he could triangulate and understand the size of the universe. What I was interested in was after he'd mapped the goddess of love, he had a second set of instructions to go to Australia and to start looking for land to colonise. And I'd argue that this colonisation led on to colonisation around the South Pacific and around the world, which 100 years later saw the implementation of Victorian legislation that outlawed homosexuality around the world, a legacy that's still in place in many countries that were part of the British Empire. So these pictures are based on photographs in the Pitt Rivers collection, historic photographs from around the world. And in the late 1800s, there was a desire to understand different cultures, and by placing people of different ethnicities in front of gridded backgrounds, to explore how their facial features and their bodies change. They're really disturbing images to us today, and I wanted to look at that idea of how museums categorize and understand difference. And while I adore museums, I was really interested in ethnographic museums. We see people's clothing and we see their objects, but we don't really understand their lives or their loves. And I was interested if we use this idea of partly the making homosexuality illegal so people had to live underground or conceal their love, but also using the lamprey method of gridding the backgrounds to understand difference. And each of these, there are 7 prints in total, each of them taken from a country where the British imposed homophobic laws, and they're all titled from those countries, and also the legislation that was enacted in
the article references the legislation.
So in Bahrain, Article 171 is the one that penalised people for homosexuality. And they're all printed, and this felt quite important. They're all screen printed on handmade cotton rag Indian paper. And they're just, as somebody who deals with material, I didn't want to digitally print. I wanted the actual materiality of the prints to be important as well.
And can you also talk a little bit about the patterns behind the clothes? Or was that?
To be honest, yeah, it's quite joyful. The honest answer is I got a big book of patterns and worked through them. And almost what I wanted these to not be historical documents, but to have a more contemporary edge. I really wanted to bring them bang up to date.
But they have a slightly Victorian William Morrissey type of feel, or maybe I feel that way because of the where we're placing the works kind of in that late 1800s.
I think actually it's the type font. I think really anchored when we were printing them. The font was the last thing to go on, and they really anchored them into a certain time period.
It's really fantastic. And can you just say a little bit more about the Pitts Rivers so that people who are watching might, if they have, because it was delayed. Well, it opened and then it had to close.
It had a glorious week opening before COVID came along.
Yeah.
So the show was due to shut in November this year, but it's being extended. So we're waiting on the details of exactly when the whole museum will be open. But we think it's probably going to go on until about June or July next year. But details are on the museum website.
Great.
And there's a really rather beautiful catalogue for sale through the Ashmolean shop at the moment.
And before we do we have a few more minutes?
We do.
My DOP.
Questions?
Okay. So what we're going to do is, shall we go in front of what I think Matt considers one of his absolute masterpieces. It's called After Boucher, and it's a gorgeous, very large, newest textile piece done, I believe, in 2020. But what month? Or no, it took 2 years. So tell us about After Boucher.
So this is another needlework piece, and it's the largest by far that I've worked on. So it's 4 foot by 5 foot, and I worked on it for about 2 years on and off. It travelled with me to Sweden, where I work at the university, and back to the UK. The volume of what's been really beautiful about this is to get it framed up and stretched. And for the first time, seeing what it looks like on a flat plane. I know the fabric very well. I've sewn on it, and it's been on my knee. But it's the first time I've seen it as separate to me and placed on the wall in a 2-dimensional way. And I'm just really delighted with how the grid pattern bounces the trees out and gives a sense of depth between the background pattern and the foreground figurative elements of the piece.
Well, it almost looks 3D.
Yeah.
Doesn't it?
Yeah. And
was that a
I didn't know that was going to happen. It's quite often with artworks when you frame them or you have distance from them, or you put them in a site-specific location, they start speaking in another way. And this is one that is working in a way I wasn't expecting, but I'm absolutely delighted with.
Well, I think it's fantastic. And can you talk a little bit about, I don't know, what motivated you when you first saw it? And what was going through your mind? Obviously, because we know Rococo, Boucher, Fragonard,
Yeah.
naughtiness, but
Well, there's a lewdness to the 18th century that I like very much, and a kind of decadence to it. And in a way, it's completely out of fashion with contemporary design, and I quite like that. I think it's really due for a renaissance and a rediscovery, and I think there's pleasure that we've been denied through mid-century modernism that I think we're all ready for it to come back to.
more fun and games and romping
fun and
frolics around.
Absolutely.
So do we have time to look at my favorite piece? And this is quite a feat of, in many ways a feat, but also the fact that it's traveled so well.
It's traveled a lot.
And it's called?
It's called Dandy, and again it was made for the Vine for John Chute's house, and it's a representation of John Chute supported by the objects he collected and finished his house with. And when it was originally shown at the Vine, it was in the centre of the staircase, and flanked on either side was a statue of Caligula, a man who knew how to have fun. And on the other side, Antoninus, the adopted son of Hadrian and Antonius, his lover. And so the three formed a queer little triangle within the National Trust that was there if people wanted to see it, but could easily be avoided if you weren't looking for it.
And it's such a feat of physics in a way, because it's
big. It's big.
Very tall.
And what looks enormous here, surprisingly, when you get into a National Trust property, just fits in really well.
Yes.
So, they're big houses and they're busy and complicated spaces.
Oh, I love Dandy. I think it deserves when this ends, it deserves a really great new home. So that brings me to tell our audience that this exhibition is open by appointment, because obviously with COVID restrictions, it is on here until the 9th of November. Many of the works that you're seeing here are for sale, and you can contact us at the Cynthia Corbett Gallery for interest. And maybe, I don't know, Anastasia, are there any questions that someone might want to ask?
Not so far, but let's tell our audience that if anyone has a question, that's a good time to ask it in the comment section of this live
Instagram, which will be so this is live now, and it will be on our Instagram TV channel, but it also will go on YouTube.
Yes.
So that viewers can watch it. It's going to be on. You're going to be a television star, if you're not already, which I think you are.
And the thing I'd like to say, and I think this is incredibly generous, is Brookfield and the Crafts Council has made sure that there's free entry to the show. So if you'd like to come along, please come along. It's been hung beautifully. A lot of work's been done by the Crafts Council.
And can we give a shout out to Anne?
I've got to say, Annabelle Campbell, who is the head of collections, has done more work on this show than anybody else, and huge thanks to her for that. She's done the plinths have been designed newly for the show, the cases have been brought in. She's done a lot of work, and it's really paid off.
Yeah, thank you so much, and thank you, Matt, so much, and thank you to Brookfields, and thank you to the Crafts Council, and thank you to all who have been watching us tonight.